Anyway, I think I know everybody. I'm Jill Weller in the Research Service Corps. I'm a training grant analyst for the campus. And this is Karen Heskett, our publications guru, or queen. Would you prefer queen? From the library. She's like, give me a crown, I'll do it. So we I'm going to go through the entire RPPR for training grants today. And the part that when I was sending out the emails, the publication part is universal to all RPPRs for NIH. So I wanted to emphasize that because I know Karen gets a lot of questions and they are such a bugger sometimes. Is that the right word? Yes, exactly. That's great. Look at it. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today, I just want you to walk away with some tips and tools, resources on how to do an RPPR. You only do training grant RPPRs once a year, I guess, unless you have multiple training grants on your desk. So sometimes it's hard to remember, for me anyway, what goes in, how is this different than a research RPPR. So I love checklists. I don't know about you people, but I love checklists. The more organized I am, the better I feel like I'm on top of things. So I created this little checklist for you, and we're going to basically this is the presentation outline. We're going to go right through this. So feel free to make notes on this. I've made some notes already, but this will be kind of like your cheat sheet you can bring back. And there's obviously a lot of other handouts I gave you. So again, I'm just going to go through the basics, A through G on the presentation for the RPPR. We'll go through the basics, the cover page, the B4, which is the accomplishments, which is probably the biggest part of a training RPPR, which includes the summaries, the data tables, the trainee diversity form, which is part of that, B4. Products, which is publication, that is Queen Karen will be doing that. And then we'll go through participants, so you know where to put the trainees or how to answer those questions. We're gonna, I gave you handouts on BioSketch and other support. We're not gonna go into the whole how to fill out a BioSketch and other support, but the resources are here for you. So when you solicit say a BioSketch from someone or other support, at least you know how to check it and verify if it's correct in the correct format. Because I would say 70% of the BioSketches that I get are wrong. Other support, wrong. A lot of people think, oh, well, the research support that's in the BioSketch, oh, that's the same thing as other support. I'll just copy that. It's two different things. So we'll kind of cover that. There are some sections that are not really applicable to training RPPR, so kind of gloss over those pretty quick. The special reporting requirements, that is basically the responsible conduct of research, and the PI has to write like a little paragraph about what the trainees did for ethics for the reporting period. So we'll also do a budget exercise. I have, that was a separate piece of paper outside the little packet that I had for you. And so we'll go through on how to put a budget together, mostly for your fund managers that do that. But I like to give an example of that. And of course, we're going to go through questions. I'm going to request that if you have specific questions to your training grant, you try to hold them to the end. I want to do more general questions. And most people that know me, I'm very open to answering questions during the class, but I also don't want to disrupt the flow of the training. So if we could try to hold off on some of those real specific questions till later so we can keep going here. Okay, so getting started on your RPPR. It's through ERA Commons. I know this sounds really basic, but some people may not know that. So for an NIH RPPR, you're going to go into ERA Commons. So the PI is the one that has to actually initiate the RPPR. So right now we're logged, this is a screenshot of a PI logged in. And they can either go through RPPR, and then they find their particular grant that they're working on, and then they would click on that way, or they could go through status, and they could click on RPPR that way. So there's two ways, kind of two pathways for them to initiate it. but they have to initiate it. So there's different, everybody has different work styles. I log in as a PI all the time for the PIs. Some PIs are like, absolutely not, you're not logging in as me, okay. Give me delegation of authority, that's fine, whatever their work style is. So once they initiate it, then this is what it's going to look like for you. So, oh, sorry, I have the actual initiate button there. And then this is what it would be. Look, I'm logged in here with myself. So say I'm going to go in and we're working on Stephanie Strachey's. That's basically our sample for the day. And so I'd be logging in as myself. And now I go to status, and then I can go to the RPPR. And now I can start editing. So I can go in and edit once the PI initiates it. So there's your edit button. So cover page, pretty simple, right? Should be pretty simple. Everything is pre-filled from the commons, but you're going to have to know who your signing official is and your admin official. Generally, I think you can look at your previous RPPRs, obviously, or your previous application, your renewal application, to see who these are, but sometimes they change, especially if you're with HISPO, they might change assignments, so you'll have to know that. I would always confirm your project periods and your reporting periods. Know exactly the time frame that you're actually reporting on. Because you're going to be putting in, for example, you are putting in an RPPR that's due 3/1, but to the end of the project period might be 6:30 or 4:30 or 5:30. So there's part of the project period that hasn't actually occurred yet, but that's what you're reporting on. So if anyone knows anything about RPPRs, you know this stupid pop-up. So it's every time you try to navigate somewhere, even if you hit save, this is going to say, are you sure you want to leave the page? And you're like, yes, I hit save, or I didn't update anything. You're still going to see this. So it's a little bit of an annoyance, but it's just part of the ERA calming module. Okay, so this is a pretty big section for B4. So we're going to get into the accomplishments. And what are the major goals of the project? So I created this from an admin's perspective. I see Dr. Howells here. So this is for an admin's perspective. And what I do on here is I put on here who the ownership should lie on. And in my opinion, based on my experience, I would say, okay, what are the major goals of the project? I would say, oh, that's the PI's responsibility. So that's why I was putting PI here. I'm not going to go over that heavily today. I'm just going to say the basic information for that. The things I'm really going to hit harder on are the things that you're ultimately responsible for. So this is actually a pretty easy question because the text should actually match what's in the application, unless, of course, things have changed. And then have any of the major goals changed since the initial competing award or previous report? Again, yes or no question. If and then this is something I would say the PI would answer. And then what was accomplished under your goals for the last reporting period? So that requires a PDF upload. And again, I would put that on the PI, unless you're the program coordinator and he has delegated that to you, or he or she has delegated that to you. I would say that's on the PI. B3 is for if you have any supplements, like a diversity supplement to your training grant, you would address that here. B4, this is the big, I would say the bulk of your RPPR is right here. And so you have to do what they call trainee progress report summaries. And something that I put in your handouts is this form here. So I'll give you an example. I was doing an RPPR for a PI last year, and I hadn't done an RPPR in years, to be honest with you. So I'm like, where do I begin? What questions do I have to ask these trainees? I have to go track them down. So I decided to come up with this form. It's very generic. Obviously, it's not tailored to your specific program, but it covers everything that the NIH wants to see. So I decided I'll just send this out to the trainee. They'll fill it out, hopefully, God willing, and then they'll send it back to you, and then you can put it in the correct format. So I ask all the basic questions and all the things that you should be covering. I like to know who their actual mentor is, because sometimes you don't know. You know, okay, they're on the training grant, but miscommunications happen and you don't know these things. Do they take any coursework that's applicable to the training grant this year? I would put all the degrees that they have. Obviously do a little paragraph about their research progress and their research topic. Have they attended any conferences? Have they presented any posters in the last reporting period? Any special fellowships or recognitions? Any workshops? Do they attend a grant writing workshop here at UCSD? You want to list all that stuff there. So that basically is all these questions here. I like to spoon feed people, especially trainees or academics, and they are so focused on their science, and they should be. So I like to take as much burden off of them as possible. So I feel I get a better response if I send them something like this. If you just send them an email, hey, could you just send me a blurb and blah, blah, blah. They're going to go, oh, okay, I know exactly what to answer. And then they're going to get it back to you, hopefully in a quicker format, quicker fashion. So that's why I like to do that. So there's a little screenshot. So I have this on the website in PDF format, fillable format, or I have it on Word. So if you want to download it, change it to whatever you want to do your tweaks, you're more than welcome to. This is just a little example of once you get all that information in your trainee form, this is how it would maybe look in your RPPR. This is kind of subjective. It all depends on, you can open up 12 different RPPRs from this campus and they're all going to look slightly different with slightly different information. So this is just an example of how it might look in the RPPR. Yes, Dr. Huff. So I actually cut this down just for the size. I actually cut off half. No, you could do, you mean a 2-page summary for each trainee? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Continuing with B4, trainees are supposed to have what they call an IDP, which is an individual development plan, with their mentor. They're supposed to meet with their mentor, I believe it's once or twice a year, and develop some sort of plan, career path for them. That is something that is kept between the individual and the PI. You don't actually submit the IDPs with the RPPR. However, the PI needs to go there and summarize, oh, okay, these were all done this year, and yada, yada, yada. This is how great they are, blah, blah, blah. Kind of almost boilerplate language, but they do need to summarize it and write a little paragraph. So table 8. Everybody loves those data tables. I know you do. Julie? So we're going to go through table 8 because that's one of the, obviously the biggest portion, the biggest time consumer of this process. So what is table 8? So table 8 from the, is basically looking at the effectiveness of your program. The NIH wants to know, okay, you're training people, now what are they doing? Are they going out and they're being research scientists? Are they working at Pfizer? Or are they working at Starbucks? They want to know the effectiveness of your program. So this information you need to track up to 15 years. So even though you're doing a reporting for this last 12 months, it's a cumulative. So you need to have the last up to 15 years. So say if your grant's only been going for 5 years, you're going to report on this period, and then you're going to also have the other 5 years of training. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. So, so it's just basically, it's a, like I said, it's a cumulative. You just keep a running spreadsheet. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. So the best way to find out who was actually appointed on the training grant is to go to Xtrain, in my opinion. Go to Xtrain and look down, or you can't really download, you have to just copy and paste all the names. And then this is going to tell you these are all the people, all the trainees that should be in the first part of Table 8. So actually going through the table, you're going to be listing the trainee's name and then that faculty member, that mentor. So that's not the project director. That is actually the mentor of that participating faculty for that trainee. When they started in the program. So this is, I see a lot of conflicting answers here. This isn't when they started on the training grant. This is when they started in the program. So if they're a grad student, they came in, what does that say, 1999? They may have came in 1999, but they didn't go on the training grant until 2000 or 2001. So that's when they actually entered the program. Okay, Lisa? She's giving me this funny look. She's like, oh. Column 4, this is going, they want to know all the sources of support this trainee has received while they've been in the program. So it's not just while they're on the training grant, it's all of those other years. So this is one of those things that you may not have access to this information. It's in payroll. And then if you go to payroll, and if it's a grad student, maybe they weren't paid through payroll. So they were paid through SAM, the SAM system, and it may not be reflected on the ledgers. So it's a digging process where you can, I'm looking at Julie because we're going through this right now. Where do you find this information? So a lot of digging has to occur here. Excavation, we'll call it excavation. So you'll see here in the training year 1 for this person, we left it blank because we didn't know the fund source. So that's okay if you do that. I mean, it happens. You're not going to know every single piece of information sometimes. Training year 2, they were on a NSF research grant, and same for TY3. TY4, you'll see AG 232. So they were on this particular training grant. That's bolded, if you can see that. So that is where they were on the training grant for TY4 and TY5. And then their last year, they were back on the NSF research grant. So this is the bottom section here is kind of a guideline of how you would write in the sources of support. Yes. So you can receive, in this, they received additional compensation from an NSF grant. So they can't receive supplementation, but they can receive additional compensation. And so that's what the 2. No, you can't pay above the stipend rate, but yes, if their stipend doesn't cover their entire, their NIH stipend, say only covers 20,000, and their stipend rate at UCSD is 25,000. So you need to come up with 5,000 difference, right? So that is what we call additional compensation. It can be a federal fund. Yeah, so the actual language, for years, I called it a supplement. It is not a supplement. It is, it is what we call additional compensation. The NIH wants to think of this as a separate appointment. It's separate work from the training grant. In our minds, it's like, okay, we're just trying to get them up to the stipend level so they make the correct amount. But actually, it's considered additional compensation. Oh, Marianne. So it should be more the dominant appointment, because sometimes a PI runs out of funds and then they put them on discretionary funds for 2 months. So generally, it's the dominant appointment. At least that's what I would do. You just don't have the room to put every single fund source. I'm sorry. No, the grant year might be completely different than their first training year. Megan? So when you have that gap, it's the additional compensation. We can go through this, but this is a big question that comes up a lot. So yes, especially for a postdoc, you can pay them from a federal fund, as long as it's a different appointment, to cover that gap, that stipend gap. Does that make sense? So they're already receiving, say, $43,000 from the training grant. It's good, and then we pay $45,000. So they're already they're not going to exceed the $43,000 which paid on the NIH stipend. The NERSA. Yes, and it's also, remember, it's 2 appointments. It's on the 3252 title code and the 3253 title code. So it's actually 2 appointments, so it looks 3252 and 3253. We're getting a little off topic, so no, it's okay. So we can revisit that because it is a hot topic actually. Continuing for the other half of the table. So here they wanted to know, this is the top part is for pertaining to pre-docs, and then the bottom part is for postdocs. So they want to know the terminal degree for a pre-doc. So in this particular example, there was none. This pre-doc left the program early, so he did not receive a degree. And the next person, they're still in training. So they're here, they're on the training grant, but maybe they have come off the training grant, but they're still here at UCSD in the program. For postdocs, which is the lower half here, they want to know that obviously when they receive their doctoral degree, and then if they're in a degree seeking program right now. Most times when we have a research postdoc here, they've already have their degree. So they're not in a degree seeking program. However, you might have a PhD in an MD program, so they are seeking another degree. So you would put that here once they receive that. Yes, Linda. Yeah, so if you don't have to do the pre-doc portion, you can leave that blank because you don't have any. So it's kind of weird, like table 8, there's 4 parts to table 8, and then then it breaks down to either it's 8A, 8B, or 8C. So it gets a little confusing based on whether you have pre-docs or postdocs. Research project, obviously you want to go ahead and list that. So then the last half of this table is probably, I would say, the hardest part. So after the trainee leaves UCSD, NIH wants to know what was their initial position. Where did they go? So in this particular incident, in this example, this person became a professor. Wow, a full professor right after a postdoc. That's pretty impressive, actually. And they went to the Chinese Academy, and it's classified as research intensive. So that was their initial appointment. A lot of mistakes that I see here, people put, oh, they were a pre-doc and then, or I'm sorry, they put in here, they continue to put, oh, they're a pre-doc here. I'm like, no, that's not their initial position after they left. They're still here and in training. The last 3 columns might be empty if they're still in training, which looks a little funny. Your PI is going to go, fill this up, people. But you can't. I mean, they want to know where they go after they leave here. Yes, Pam? Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And then they want to know their current position. So say someone left here, remember you have to go back 15 years. So say someone left here in 2010, their initial position was at the Chinese Academy. Now, 8 years later, where are they? So now they're a professor at Zhejiang University, still doing research. So how do you find out from the initial to the current? That's where you become a cyber stalker and you stalk them on LinkedIn. So, and then you have to know if they actually did go into research, did they receive any grants? That's actually probably more on the easier side, because you could just go into NIH Reporter, type in their name, if it was NIH funded, right? A lot of it, you're going to have to stay in contact with your trainees, and it's not easy. So it's just something that you just kind of have to keep up on. Yes, Dr. Howell. So I would say that they're still in training. So they've already received their MD? Okay, so they're a residency. I would say they're still in training until they leave and get their first job. The second part, yes, Elizabeth. So when they come in, how do you decide when they came into the program? So generally you have to go into the payroll system, and it's going to say their initial hire date, and it'll say what they were hired as, that they're hired as a graduate student researcher, so then you know, okay, they came into the program in September 2004. And then you can see, okay, they win it. That their first year of funding would be TY1, and then TY2, TY3, and whatever. To find out that information, generally it's all going to be in the payroll system. So you're going to either have to, if you don't have access to it, your fund manager is going to have to look it up for you. There are queries you can do. The query system, I've been working with Pam on that. It's very funky. It's also not reliable as far as pre-doc salaries, because a lot of the pre-docs are paid in SAM. That's the student aid management system. And I'm pointing in this direction because that's the grad division would set up their appointments, and then they're not showing up on the ledger, or they show up with just their PID number. So doing a query, it's hard. But yeah, sometimes you might have, if you have a graduate coordinator, you have to go back to the graduate coordinator and say, can you help me figure out each year's source of support? Yes, yeah. So because they're going to be they're going to either be in a pre-doc program, our trainees, or they're going to be starting a postdoc here in the training here. So remember, there's 4 parts to the table 8. This is the second part, which is what we call clearly associated. So this is, you'll see the same format as the part 1, but you have to define clearly associated. What are clearly associated? So I think it was in 2015, NIH came up with this. And so what it is if you have 4 pre-docs, say in Dr. Ginsberg's lab, and one of them is on the training grant, and then you have these 3 other ones, and they happen to be paid on HHS funds or an R01, those could be considered clearly associated if they have been receiving the identical experience as to the one that's on the training grant. So it doesn't matter if they're a non-citizen or citizen, they actually would have been eligible to go on the training grant. That's not really a factor here. It's just they want to know, were these other 3 receiving an identical experience? So obviously this table can get really large because you may have, that's pretty much the rest of campus, right? I mean, the rest of your labs. So how a PI interprets this comes into play here, because I have a PI that says, absolutely not. If they are not on the training grant, these other 3 are not receiving an identical experience. They're not clearly associated. Don't put anything in there. But if you ask your PI and say, oh, well, we do have someone here. Are they? Yep, absolutely the same program. Then you're going to have to list all those other training. They're not really, they're students, other trainees that are not actually on the training grant. Does that make sense? So basically it just opens up a whole can of worms. You're like, oh, I just thought I had to do everybody that was next training. No. Again, this was a fairly new reporting requirement. So it's a cumulative. So you don't go back 15 years of clearly associated. You just do the current year and then again start building that table up. So parts 3 and 4, there's no recent, this isn't applicable to RPPR, so you can leave that out. And then part 4 are program statistics, and this is where your PI needs to go in and summarize this data in a paragraph within this section. So it's nothing for you to do there, but you have to be able to give him all of that data for him to summarize the data. So if you're not done with your data table 8 till the day of the deadline, he still needs to write that paragraph. So again, how do you gather the information for table 8? Basically, I just go out to Google, LinkedIn, Facebook. I put the person's name in there. I look up in PubMed. Have they been publishing recently? What institution are they publishing from? And that can kind of lead you into trying to find them. The best way to, like we talked a little bit about the payroll system to look up fund sources clearly. Like I said, it's not really reliable for pre-docs. You can find some post-doc information. If you have the email of that person, which you sometimes do, have they still have like their Area Commons account. You can get their email off there. Try to email them for information. Basically, the best way is to keep good records. And we don't have any magic tools right now. We don't have a database yet. But in the meantime, I recommend this trainee tracking form. And this is, again, a cumulative. You're just going to start tracking all your trainees and all the information you're going to need to know for the next 15 years, basically. So I'll give you an example. I won't name any names, but especially if you come into a new position and then you're realizing they didn't keep any records. What do? I have to do, sorry, Julie, I'm going to name names. What do? You don't have access to their, I'm like, okay, well, they got to have something on that hard drive. Nope. So, be kind, and here, let's use the Valentine's word, loving. Loving to the next person behind you, because you know you're not going to be in this job forever. Start creating good records. And every time, you add a trainee, put them on here. Every time they go to a conference, update the spreadsheet. So there's actually 3 tabs to the spreadsheet. I just did one for participating faculty, the ones that the actual trainees, and then you could do one of all just clearly associated if you wanted to start building a table for that. So this is on my website. Again, it's not real fancy. It's just a spreadsheet, but when it comes down time for the renewal, you'll pretty much take whatever you can get. So, anybody have any questions on that part? Yeah. Well, they have to go in for a competitive renewal every 5 years. It's not a guarantee. Yeah, especially the older training grants. And Dr. Howell could probably speak to this better than I could. But we're seeing a lot are not getting renewed on the first go around. And then we have to put in what am I thinking? A1. They're going to have to put it in again, resubmission. And it just depends. Sometimes NIH wants to see things innovative and going forward. And sometimes these older training grants might be a little bit more stagnant, and so they want to see it, really refreshed. And so a lot of the older training grants, we have training grants. My goodness, trying to think. Maggie, how long did that training grant? 25, 30 years, and they're not getting renewed. So. They shouldn't think it's a slam dunk. Certainly not a slam dunk. The one form that you have to do what they call this trainee diversity form. For again, we're still in section B4, if you can believe it. It goes to G, but it gets quicker. So you actually have to know the ethnicities, hopefully, if they close it to, and the races of your trainees. So I use this as an example. So we have on this example 11 trainees, and then basically your number here at the bottom should equal the amount of trainees. So you can see here, okay, there's one male that's a Hispanic, and then the other 10 are not. And so all your numbers need to add up to how many are on your training grant. The second half of this is the racial categories. So this is something that Lisa and I came across. If you have someone that's Hispanic on the top portion, the ethnic category, under race, they're considered white. So it's funny, I have Googled this. You cannot find directions to this. It's so weird. NIH is so big on guidelines and directions, but everything I've seen, you put them under white. So you can see here those 7. And then you can see the other racial categories. And then this one is just, the part B is just about reporting on the. So if you see here at the top, this is an NIH form. It says do not use this for for collection. They don't want you to, they don't want you to hand it to the trainee and say, fill this out. Basically, when you're doing your internal interviews and you're doing your hiring of that new trainee, if they're filling something out, you can ask them, but they don't have to disclose it. So, I'm sorry. You really should, you know, you really should be. That's one of the issues is because that's such a fragmented process, everybody on campus has their own way of accepting applications for their training grant. So it's really up to your PI until we standardize that, how that goes. And but again, you know, they don't have to disclose it by law. Oh, I think, Lisa, did you have a question? If they choose to, yeah. Yeah, and that's why on that trainee tracking sheet, I do put that there. So if you happen to know, you're not supposed to just look at someone and say, oh, you look. I'll give you an example. My niece is a redhead, and she is a quarter Japanese, a quarter Mexican. What else is she? And then we're Dutch. She's a quarter Dutch, and then Polish and German. And you would think with a redhead, she doesn't have any Japanese or Hispanic in her, but it's there. So I can't wait till she does her college application. But so you can't look at someone and say, okay, they identify as that. They have to self-identify. They should, anyway. I'm sorry? Really, they should tell you, so. You could. So this is going to be, but for the RPPR, they've already been appointed to the training grant. This isn't their initial application. So if they have a CV or something or an interview where you're taking that initial information, you can ask it, but yeah, always have that disclaimer. You don't have to answer. You know, I don't know about violations. I violate things all the time, so don't. If you're asking for the right way to do something, I'm not the person to. Yeah. I mean, some people are going to, you know, yeah, it's fine. So the last part here is trainees with disabilities or disadvantaged backgrounds. So if you have anybody in that category, you would list that here. Yes. So their ethnicity may be Hispanic, but their racial identity would be white. So just make sure in the end it adds up to however many were appointed. Okay, so B4, we're almost done. So you have all these components to B4. You have your trainee summaries that you've collected either on the form, you collate them. You have your summary from your PI, your tables 1 and 2. And this summary from the PI for part 3, and then you have your trainee diversity plan. So you're going to put that all in one big PDF and upload that into B4. But that is going to be the bulk of your work, I would say. Do you guys need a break, or we keep going? Okay, because you guys are like, oh, I gotta get to the page. So these, I've just put these up here just for your reference, and again, they're on your checklist. These are usually not applicable to a training grant. What do you plan to do for the next reporting period to accomplish these goals? Again, that goes off on your PI. One of the good things about the checklist is you can sit down with them and say, hey, you are responsible for these things, and I am responsible for these things. It's just called communication, because you don't want to come down to the day before this is due and then your PI is going to go, oh, I thought you were writing the budget justification, and you're going, no, I thought you were going to write it. So just it's clear communication, good practice. So here we are at products, or what I like to call Queen Karen section. So publication. So what we're going to go through today. Karen is going to talk about some non-compliance stuff, but I'm also going to talk about how you actually connect, I guess that's the word, a publication that's in MyNCBI to the RPPR. So I'm going to talk about that, and then we'll let Karen come up and do her portion. So there's a lot of questions in Section C. Basically, everything else is not applicable to you. Mentions, all that stuff. If your PI says something, okay, yes, they do have something great, but generally speaking, for training RPPRs, they're not. So it's really just the publication. This is the fun part. So it's going to ask you a question. It's going to say, are there any new publications in the last reporting period? If you say no, well, that doesn't look very good for starters, but if hopefully you say yes, and then this is going to come up. And you can see this is broken down into 3 sections. The top section, these are publications that have not yet been reported to NIH. And these are probably, obviously, in the last reporting period. The second portion, these are publications that are not associated with the RPPR. So if you have a PI that has hundreds of publications, you're going to be scrolling down a lot. And if you see there on the left-hand side, that checkbox is not checked. These are not associated with this RPPR. Then the bottom part, these are all the publications that have been associated previously from previous reporting periods for the RPPR. I'm sorry? This is publications, you mean, in the RPPR? This is within the RPPR module. So you go and click on that, and then whether you answer yes or no, then you're going to have to associate the publication in MyNCBI, which is a website obviously outside of this, and then it's going to appear here. And then whether you can associate it or not. Dr. Howell? If it was associated at some, yes, it could be. Yeah, because this is being pulled by your ERA comments. So for this part, I thought this was just basically pulled on his ERA Commons ID. The top ones would be pulled based on the grants. So if they're associated with the grant, should either go on previously reported or it's going to be reported. Whatever's in his MyNCBI is going to show up there, right? Yeah. And also the author needs to remember to cite the grant. Yes. And the ERA Commons? Actually, NIH report. If you go into NIH Reporter and you put in your training grant and then you hit publications, all of the publications that ever been associated will be listed. It should be linked, yeah, because they're linked. So it's all linked through the MyNCBI. That makes sense. They've been reported. So do we have more questions? And then, because we're going to be covering this more, so we might be answering more questions. Megan had a question. Once you associate the two, yes, then it's going to be. And that's connected, that you have connected with this grant. Yeah, the big key is getting the publication into the PI or whoever's in MyNCBI, and then connecting the two, making that bridge. Pam, can we discuss that? We'll do it after, offline. Okay. I forgot where I was. I think we covered this. If the publication is not in MyNCBI, it's not going to appear here. It has to be connected. Otherwise, it doesn't know it exists. And then once you connect them, obviously, it's going to show up here. So then you also have that second column, which is compliance, which we're going to talk about in more detail. But the bottom line for a grants administrator is you can still submit your RPPR on time with non-compliant publications. So if you do that, you are going to get something what they call a PRAM, and you're going to have to get all your publications in compliance by the time, if you want your money, next year's money. So remember the grantee, you can That's either the UCSD, really the PI is responsible for compliance ultimately, and it can take a long time to get these in compliance, as we all know. So it's just an ongoing process. It's something that you have your hands in quite a bit. So I'm just going to talk about how to respond to a PRAM, which is when they ask, once you submit your RPPR, it comes back and says, okay, you have non-compliant pubs. So this is like an automatic email that's sent to the PI, and the PI has to go into the Commons and initiate the PRAM. So you can see I circled it here. And basically, then you're going to have to go through there and figure out, okay, which publications are out of compliance, how to get them in compliance. And this is where so then once you get everything in compliance, you're going to create a PDF in MyNCBI, and then you will upload that within ERA Commons. One thing that NIH is really a stickler about, they don't want you to send that PDF to the PO, the program official, or the grants management specialist. They would rather have it straight into the Commons. Otherwise, they're going to have to scan it, put it in. So stay on their good side. So I'm going to give this over to Karen. Does anybody need a break? Or I know you guys are so excited about publications.
All right. So this is one of the screenshots that you'll be looking at when you are trying to figure out how do I start that process. You'll oftentimes, if you just put everything in that you can find into the MyNCBI, My Bibliography, you saw a screenshot, this one. We'll actually go through it. You'll see one of these items, and when you first put it in, the status is unknown because it's just a list. It hasn't been connected with a grant. And so this would be for a specific article. You tell it, yes, it was associated with the grant, or no, it wasn't. And you have different options. Now, this is the bottom one. This citation does not need to be submitted. That's where that middle column on the publications report. So we have the what's new, what's old, and then this middle section. Those are the ones that might be tagged with this, where it's not grant associated, or it could just be a whole list of other publications with other grants. So what do you really need to know to back up a little bit? Because this will come into play. You don't need to know article versus manuscript when you're just putting your information into My Bibliography. Where you need to know that is when you're troubleshooting, because you need to be able to explain to the person you're saying, go submit something, what the difference is. You also have to keep in mind peer review. And we won't go into that detail. For the most part, peer review is going to be something that will apply to most articles that talk about the activity done on a specific grant. So article versus manuscript. This is a manuscript. It's very much a Word document. It is not what you see in a journal. And that's important because you don't want to upload a PDF from the journal. That's not what NIH wants. It wants the author manuscript. So peer review is sometimes called referee, and I don't think we need to cover that. So author manuscript, this is a nice graphic that gives you an idea of what NIH wants. So there's a whole process, and the way I explain that line right in the middle is it's the last manuscript submitted to the publisher. After there have been some changes, the peer reviewers have made some suggestions. It does not look like the journal because it hasn't had the copyright, or sorry, the copy editing and the typesetting done. So that's the one that they want, is the last one submitted to the publisher. So which ones actually have to be tagged with an award? And so it's important to realize that there are 3 things that have to come into play for something to be NIH public access policy items. And if not all three of those things are done, then you don't have to worry about it. It's exempt. So it has to be peer reviewed. And so we can talk more about what that is later. Was the article done with NIH funding? And this is probably the case for most of you. Was it done after April 2008? And so that's when the policy was enacted. If no is the answer to any of those, then it is exempt and you don't have to worry about that process. But if it's yes for all three, those are the ones that have to go through the process. So the rule is that it's 12 months after the journal or the journal article is published in a journal. So in PubMed, you may have seen EPUB ahead of print. We're not talking about that. That's an early release. We're talking about when it actually has volume and issue and page number. That's when the 12-month clock starts ticking. However, a couple of years ago, they made it a little bit more stringent, which is if the author is going to have to submit the manuscript themselves, it has to be done within 3 months after the journal was accepted. So they don't want people to wait 12 months. You can go in and there's just a quick checkbox for embargo this, meaning hide it from public view until the 12 months are up. But 3 months is the timeline that you're going to be looking at because most authors have to submit the manuscript themselves. There's a few where the journal will do it for them, which is great. But by and large, we're talking about this process. So these are the different ways that the information can get into PMC or PubMed Central. What we're talking about is method C, where you as a delegate or the author themselves will submit the manuscript. It's to the system called the NIH Manuscript Submission System. Then what happens after that is to confirm that this is a proper submission. The author actually gets an email that they have to respond to. And this is one of the places where you will have some issues where it's stalled out because the PI or the submitting author has not responded to that email. So I've seen quite a few of those where it's just languishing. It should have been responded to a long time ago. It then gets converted and the author then will get another email, so another place where things can get solved, to approve the formatting conversion, make sure everything's okay, and eventually it gets into PubMed Central. So just another screenshot of how that process works. If you're starting from scratch, it can take as much as 6 weeks to get from depositing to having it available in PubMed Central or PMC. So an embargo, I mentioned that earlier. This is simply a delay. The system will hide the full text until the appropriate time. So you just select that and you don't have to worry about, okay, what's the date that it should be? The system actually is connected well so that it knows when it's officially published and it will know when that 12 months is up. So you just select that and they will take care of the rest. Most of you probably know this, know that it can be linked with ERA Commons, which is great because you get a lot of connectivity, and ERA Commons is the way for you to sign into MyBibliography. I know some people will do just the straight sign in on the MyNCBI page, but you really want the ERA Commons because that pulls in your grant information. When you enter information into MyBibliography, the best way is to have it come from PubMed. So there's a couple of ways that that can happen. You've probably found it yourself. You can just do straight send to MyBibliography, you're done. You can manually enter things, and this is necessary when things are published outside of PubMed, and that does happen. PubMed has a list of about 5,700 journals, and there are tens of thousands of them out there. So you're going to run into them. If you're just starting this process and you happen to have a list of citations in a citation management program, or somebody has it on, say, their Google Scholar profile page, you can actually suck it out of there and upload it in a bulk fashion into the MyBibliography, so you don't have to do it one at a time. It's really nice. There is that as an issue. So so that's why I say when you're first starting, you can do that. It is a little bit tricky later on. However, what I found is if you manually enter, so a bulk upload would be similar to a manual entry. If you do that and then later associate the PMID with the typed in entry and there's something already in there, it will actually say, this is a duplicate, and it will, if you've done any work on them, like doing an award, associating an award, it will merge the two of them so that you don't have to worry, which one do I delete? There'll be a command that says, do you want to merge? All right, so why it's important, well, we already covered this. If it's not in MyBibliography, if it's not in that other citation space, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit so that you can see what that really means. It's not going to be in the progress report. So I've thrown two terms out, PubMed, PMC, or PubMed Central. This is the difference. PubMed is the database. It's a citation database, meaning once you've read the details about when it was published, the title, who the authors are, and you get that abstract, that's where it stops. There's no full text. That's why you need the little buttons like UC eLinks or the publisher's button. PubMed Central or PMC, I think it was confusing for people to hear PubMed Central, so they've been using PMC in the last year or two. This is the repository of full text articles. So you might find something that looks like it came out of a journal. You might find that author manuscript information that's there. That's where you're going to be storing and depositing the NIH manuscripts. So there's identification numbers, and these get really confusing. PMID, PubMed ID. It's the unique identifier that's in the PubMed database. Anything that goes into PMC has a PMC ID number. So to uniquely identify it in PMC, that PMC ID number actually gets pushed back over to PubMed. And so in some of your items that you look at in PubMed, you'll have both a PMID number and a PMC ID number. And that C is sometimes glossed over and it gets a little bit confusing. But the end result is if your article has a PMC ID number, it's been through the process. It has everything it needs. It should be compliant. Here's those warning labels again. So for those who are new to it, and as we heard earlier, the progress report can still be submitted if things are not in compliance. And so you have a little bit of time, and hopefully if you're still working on a few things, you'll be able to get that compliance before the funding is given. When you're first putting an item into MyBibliography, you get this question mark. What do you do? Well, you just need to add the grant information. So you do add award, and one of the following icons will appear. If it's the green one, it's time to relax. It's done, it's good. Sometimes you'll see this, and that's a good sign. It means that the compliance process has started. So it means that manuscript has been deposited with the NIH manuscript submission system. There's that unique identifier attached to the record in MyBibliography. If it's a recent article, you may not need to do anything further. You just let it go through the process. But if it's more than 12 months old, something is stalled. I'd say actually, well, yeah, I'd do it right at about 12 months. So if it's 12 months, because that's the deadline for NIH, something stalled. So you're going to have to backtrack, figure out what's going on. But you should have the NIH manuscript ID number. And that's another system that you can log into. And so the easiest way I get to it is I just go Google NIH Manuscript Submission System, and it's usually the first one there. You log in with the ERA Commons, and then you have a table telling you, okay, these ones need attention, these are stalled, these are in process, and another list for ones that are already in PMC, and you can see where things are. So some of the things you can do to troubleshoot, if the PI has not been the one to deposit the article, hopefully the depositing author did a good, thorough job and listed the different authors in the depositing process, because that means that any of the authors can go in and look at the manuscript submission system and see where the article is stalled. If an author wants to take over the process, they actually have a system for doing that. So you can go in and say, okay, I want to watch this article through the process, and if the corresponding author doesn't object, then you can watch it and see how it goes. If the PI says, okay, after that process, which is about a week, I want to claim this and I want to push it through the process because we're getting stalled, there is a process for that as well. All right, so this is the one that you don't want to see. And this is probably the one that you see the most, especially if you're coming in and cleaning things up. So this is going to pop up for a number of reasons. It's been associated with a grant, so that that award has been added, but there's nothing in the NIH manuscript submission system, or if there is, it's way over a year old. And so hopefully once the process gets finished and there's a PMC ID number, then that red thing will turn to green and everyone will be happy. So there's so many different reasons why it might be in this condition, and it could be that it's stalled. It could be that the process was never started. It could be a number of different factors, including the fact that the article wasn't acknowledged as an award granted publication. I've seen that happen a couple of times. And so the PI at that point has a decision to make. Do I just say, okay, this was not, I'm going to not count this as grant funded activity, or I'm going to go through the process of adding that grant, getting that deposited, and usually the person who has that manuscript, you have to hunt them up, figure out where they are, if they have the manuscript, or they can go an extra step and go back to the publisher and say, this, we forgot to acknowledge this, can we make this correction so that it's actually reflected in the article. I don't know how much NIH wants to see that in the acknowledgments, so that might be something to kind of pursue and see how it goes. How do you check if something is grant funded? Because you can't always just call up the PI and say, hey, was this grant funded, and work into their process. So there's two ways you can do that. When you're looking at the item in PubMed, you can expand underneath the abstract for an article, you can actually expand that field and see if the grant was mentioned right there, and PubMed might know about it. Otherwise, get the full text of the PDF and check the acknowledgement sections, which is usually right above the references, to see if the grant is mentioned there. So those are two things you can do before you have to ask the PI, is this grant funded? If it's not listed, talk with the PI about what to do next. If the grant is listed, then you need to track down one of those authors. And so if something is 4 years old, that's going to be a harder process than if it's just a year old, and get that NIH process started. And you know from experience, right? Yeah. If you're talking about PubMed, so the MyBibliography is not automatically pulling in that information from PubMed, which is a good thing, because that's where the mangling of a grant number can happen. In my bibliography, when you sign in through ERA Commons, it actually pulls the grant numbers from the ERA Commons, so it should be an authoritative list without variation of that grant number. So that's an interesting question. So if you're not automatically pulling from the ERA Commons grant number and somebody has typed it in manually, which you can do, how does the progress report sort of distinguish between the two? I haven't run into that yet to know exactly what would happen with that. It might be something to play around with, because it is something that you can change and see what it does. Whether spaces or dashes can make a difference. Do you have any thoughts on that? Okay. It's not OCR, so there's not an automatic process. I haven't been through the depositing process. I'm not sure. It had you select from a list, okay. Right, so then you can, yeah, so yeah, the ERA Commons has its fingers out in a lot of places, so it really is the hub of the information. So it connects with the manuscript submission system, the MyBibliography, the progress report. So I think there's a way to make sure that it can be affiliated, but I don't think it's manually entered when you're in the manuscript submission system. There's actually a place, I think, in the manuscript submission system to say who's the PI. And that might then suck it in. Okay, yeah, that's good to know that it hasn't been a problem for anyone else. So that's great. All right.
I think I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have more to cover. Are we okay on the? Okay. Good. It's good to know. Okay. The rest of the sections of the RPPR are not as time-consuming as B4 and publication. So this will go a little bit faster. So for participants, you have a couple questions here, and it's going to say what individuals worked on the project. And you're going to say, oh, I've got 12 trainees. That's not what goes here. This is just asking about the PD, PI, or the key personnel. So usually that's 1 to 2 people, and they're just asking for their information here. So that's what's going to be entered, which is defaulted to whoever is the PI or the co-PI listed in common. And generally, it's going to be left with, it's not going to have any effort amount, so it's usually 0 effort amount person month, because there's no PI salary on a training grant. But we all know they have about 10% effort on a training grant. So big thing to remember here is your trainees are not listed here. Those are covered in your table 8 and in your training summary. No, none of your participating faculty. So this should just be 1 to 2 people. Unlike a research RPPR, you could have, 5, 6, 10 people on there. So it's going to ask you about personnel updates and your level of effort. So generally speaking, this isn't applicable to a training grant because you don't really go by that 25% threshold. How many of you are familiar with that with research grants? And when you're setting up if a PI has a portfolio and they can only go up or down 25% without prior approval. So generally that is not going to be applicable here because there's no paid effort for the PI. It's going to ask, are there any new senior key personnel? And this is where if you have a new participating faculty that's just joined your training grant, you're going to collect their bio sketch from them and their other support and upload it here. So that's the main thing here. Yes. if you have a list of 80 faculty right now and you just have a new faculty come on to the training grant as a mentor, just the new one, just that new one. Because the rest of them were put in with the initial renewal. And then it's going to also want to know for your key personnel, so your PD, PI, are there any changes in other support? So it's a yes or no question, and they just want to know if there's a change in the active support. So generally speaking, you know, your PI could have gotten a new grant, and you're going to need to submit an other support document for your PI. So I'm not going to go through this because this isn't really a BioSketch class or other support class, but this is as your handouts, and I kind of like to have this when I'm checking a BioSketch. Sometimes some of you are putting a BioSketch together. Some of you are saying you're collecting them and gathering them from the PI, but I just like to point out all the things that you should be looking for here as far as from an admin perspective. The bottom part is the research support, which is it's different than the other support. So on the next guide, the checklist, this just basically goes through what are all the requirements for research support and what are all the requirements for other support. And I kind of highlighted here all the different things that are required for other support. There's just a lot of inconsistencies I see. It's a lot of sloppiness when people are doing biosketches and other support. So this is why I came up with a little checklist, because I just love checklists. And so just to kind of keep it straight for you, so you remember, okay, I'm doing a biosketch, that's no effort amounts. This has effort amounts. You know, this has dollar amounts. This doesn't. So just so you know. Other significant contributors, you know, a lot of this is going to be, you have to ask your PI, and they're going to be answering these questions for you. The PI leadership program plan doesn't usually apply to training grants, so just a yes or no question. Impact, easiest section ever, not applicable. Pretty much everything is not applicable here. Sometimes it's not even highlighted for you to even check anything. So changes, you want to know the changes in the training program for whatever reason. And these are mostly your PI questions, just describing any programmatic changes, maybe with the faculty or the approach and how they're, I don't know, they're training their trainees. So that's a PI question. You're going to look at significant changes for all the following things here: humans, animals, biohazards, select agents. Generally speaking, we don't have a lot of training grants that this is applicable to. I'm just saying that in general terms, but it may be something that you just have to discuss with your PI. He'll tell you whether things have changed or not. Well, we're just moving right along. 2 more sections. The special reporting requirements. So again, this is one of those questions, nothing to report or upload file. You know, it's such a daunting thing in general. When you look at the RPPR, you're looking at all these different pages and you're like, oh my gosh, but it's nice to know, like, some of these things are just, you don't have to worry about. So the big thing here is G2, which is responsible conduct of research. This is something your PI should be addressing every year in like a paragraph or 2 for the grant. It's pretty kind of boilerplate-ish, I like to say. That's a new word, boilerplate-ish. But standard verbiage, and basically they're just saying, I noticed Dr. Howell walked out at the most appropriate time there. You know, your trainees are going through their ethics requirements. What courses do they take associated with that? You know, it's almost the same verbiage every year. And you just upload the PDF. But that's generally on the PI. So a lot of this is not applicable. Human subjects, we don't have a lot of training grants with human subjects, so this isn't going to come up very often. We have no clinical trials associated with training grants on the campus. Not that I know, everyone has changed. But so a lot of this is going to be no or not applicable. So Under G8, they have performance sites. So if you have Salk Institute or LJI, different performance sites would be listed here. But if you notice, like for this one, and anybody that's had experience with this, like UCSD is up there 12 times. If you notice, so you can actually go in and delete these. You just have to have UCSD listed once. It's just a little cleaning, housekeeping thing, but something that us OCD people like to do. Foreign components usually are not applicable to your training grant. So this gets into a very interesting topic, estimated unobligated balances. So when I first started doing RPPRs, I would get confused between an unliquidated expense and an unobligated balance. So these terms are just very interesting. So this is a big main difference between a research RPPR, because that's something that really you need to calculate with your fund manager. Are we going to have an unobligated balance more than 25% at the end of the year? And generally, with training grants, there is no carryover. You cannot carry funds forward without prior approval. However, you know that we have trainees that are not paid the same time as the budget year. So they will be carried forward, but at what we call an unliquidated expense. So generally speaking, the answer to these questions, these are going to be not applicable to you. Okay? However, I just want to explain the difference because my little graph here, we all experience this with a training grant, that a trainee can be appointed any time in that period between 7/1 and 6/30. They're going to be appointed on the last day of the grant. And you're going to carry forward their stipend for the next year. That is not considered an unobligated balance. It would not go towards that unobligated balance. That is what we call an unliquidated obligation. So it's obligated. We've already chosen who the trainee is, and we've already obligated that balance or that expense. Does that make sense? So this area, they started October 2017. It looks like it's being carried forward into the next year, but it's not really carried forward. It's an unliquidated expense, something you just haven't spent it yet, but you do have it obligated for that trainee. I'm sorry? Well, they're looking for this as the reporting period. So say this is your reporting period here, and they want to know, are you going to have a balance after this date? Well, technically, yes, you're going to have a balance, but the expenses are already obligated to that trainee. It doesn't count towards that 25%. Yeah, so really it's just like a big no. And hold on one second. The training related expenses, generally you're not running a huge, positive amount in that. So generally that's not going to be able to commit. But it would be 25% of the total award anyway. No, it's just going to show them, it just shows at the top the reporting or the period of the grant, whatever grant you're in, and then it just shows the date. Yeah, this is something that I kind of, when I track my trainees, and there's different ways of tracking them, but when you track them like financially in their appointments, this is something I would do. And then you know who, how much your subsequent expense would be at the end of the year. Was there another question? No? Okay. So I don't know, for me, there's that UN there. Unobligated, unliquidated. It's kind of confusing. I'm a simple person. I'm sure you guys are all much smarter than I am. So anyways, I just wanted to clarify that for you guys. The rest of the section for G, pretty much not applicable. There's no program income. F&A costs, 8%. It ain't changing, so don't try to change it. Budget. So I have a little sheet here. Hopefully you picked it up. This was outside the packet. And we're going to do kind of a little sample budget right now. So the budget also, whenever you're submitting a budget, they want a budget justification. So for this particular, for training grants, you are going to submit what they call a PHS training budget. There's going to be a drop down here, and I couldn't get a screenshot of it, but it's going to say either the PHS 424 or the 398, and you're going to want to check 398 training budget. And you would go in and edit this. The things you're going to need to know before you put your budget together is you're going to need to know the current stipend levels, and then you're going to need to know the current graduate fees. And I've actually done that for you here through our little cheat sheet. So in this particular example, I'm doing 3 pre-docs and 3 post-docs, which I did not put on there, but so you're going to see here, I have 3 pre-docs, and the amount is $23,844 at the top of your page times 3. So that's that amount. Postdocs, I have one at level 1, level 2, and level 3, and it's your postdoc amounts are right here, and then that equals $146,376, and here's your total stipend. So I did classify, just kind of for simplicity's sake, that these are non-degree postdocs. I could have put them in degree seeking, and then we could have added tuition and fees for them, but I kind of wanted to keep it relatively simple. So then you're going to see tuition and fees there for your pre-docs, and it's $40,000. So this is where you're going to need to know what's the current graduate division, the fee and tuition rates. So it says here 17,000. So 17,000 times 3 is not 40,000. You have to calculate it without the health insurance. So the reason why you have that whole grid here is because 3,573 of that 17,000 goes to their health insurance. So you need to deduct that amount and then do it times 3. Does that make sense? Sorry? Yes. For tuition and fees, yes. It could be considered an unliquidated expense that wasn't paid during that reporting period. Yes. Yeah, this is for the next budget year. So you're doing the budget for the new year. So if you put it on your your FER as unliquidated expenses for tuition, yes, it would be for the next year. Okay, not for tuition and fees. I think you're thinking of trainee-related expenses, which is different. For pre-docs, absolutely, that could be an unlimited expense. But if they don't spend like their discretionary money, then no, you're not supposed to carry that forward to the next year. It's not carry forward. Actually, one second, I'd like to know who the analyst is, because I'd like to talk to him myself. Okay, yeah, generally speaking, pre-doc, if you have tuition and fees that haven't been paid out yet, absolutely they could be an unliquidated substitute. Nice. So that's great. It saves you money. So generally speaking, I mean, there's no written rule, but if and we're going to get to it on the next page, but if a postdoc is receiving $8,850, did I get that right? Yes. In trainee-related expenses, you could say, okay, 6,000 of it goes towards their insurance. It really depends on you and your PI, how much, or you could say all of it goes towards your insurance, because more than likely it's going to go over. In your case, if they're getting, if their spouse is paying for it, then they're going to have a bit of money, substantial money there. But you want to also keep it consistent between your postdocs. So there's usually always going to be an overage for the training grant. Is not going to cover all of the insurance. So the PI, the mentor, is going to have to cover it. I would say generally it goes back to the mentor, not necessarily the project director of the grant. Someone's going to have to cover that, and then there's also unallowable insurance expenses. Yeah, I mean, it's completely the description. Okay, so going on to the second page, or the third page, I guess, for you guys. I put in here for travel, it would be $750 per trainee, so that's where you get that $4,500. The training-related expenses, so I calculated this as there's 3 postdocs, and then there's 3 pre-docs, so 4,200 times 3, right in the middle of your page here, and then 8,850 times 3 comes up with that number. There's your total direct cost requested, and then, or other direct costs, I should say, and then the total direct cost between the previous page, stipend, your fees, and your other direct costs is 301,896. This is an 8% IDC rate. And then, so your direct cost base is that 301,896 minus the amount for tuition and fees, for which was, I believe, 40,338. And then that's going to be your base. So then you do that times 8%, and that's where you're going to come up with the 20,095. And then you take that number plus the 301,896, whoops, and then that's your total amount. Yes, Megan. So this isn't for the reporting. This is what you're doing for the next budget year. So you can do that, or you can say realistically, because you're going to add a budget justification at the bottom, say, hey, you know, we have this great trainee, we want them to continue, and so we're requesting a level 2 instead of, you know, what we originally asked for in the renewal application. Whether they give you that is, it all depends. Depends on the award, but I mean, it has happened. I know we've got 2 minutes, so I'm gonna. Yeah, it's good. I mean, when they give you the general, you know, the initial NOA, it's in general terms because the stipend levels change. Luckily, there are no sub-awards with any of our training grants on campus, so it's not applicable. Kind of just finishing up the whole entire process. Before you start routing it, you want to check for errors, and then you can correct your errors. I did this, and there's a lot of stuff missing here. So sometimes remember, you're going between each screen, and if you don't save something correctly, it's kind of a duplicate stuff. So make sure you check for errors, and then once all of them have to be corrected. You know, if it's a warning, as you know, that it can still be submitted with a warning, but you can't submit them actual errors. So once you pass all your validations, then what I would recommend is save a copy of that RPPR somewhere on your hard drive, send a copy to your PI. It's also going to be in the Commons, but I would also keep a record. And then because, one thing I didn't mention very clearly, because training RPPRs have a budget, you have to do EPD, which for SALT people, just ignore me, but EPD is the whole internal system we have for routing grants. So you have to get an EPD number, set it up in EPD, and then you're going to have to route it through the signatory and administration officials, whether it's in CISCO or CTA, and then they actually submit it to the agency. That is something that's drastically different from a research RPPR. Research RPPRs, or if there's no budget and if there's SNAP, they are directly submitted by the PI for that. So that's something that's slightly different with the training RPPRs. Just one quick thing, just so we, everything's on the website. This is just a really high level, the basics that you need to do for an RPPR. And then we have all of the BioSketch publication information on, are you in the next class? Oh, okay, we're just wrapping it up. Everything's on the website, and question and answer, well, I guess we're doing those in the lobby.